I'm just going to take a quick look here because I want to make sure. Oops, not that one. I think I was having issues with audio the last time as well. So, hello. My channel. Oh, what am I forgetting to do here, guys? How come this isn't broadcasting? We are in and we are streaming. Let me try to navigate to this via this link. This was working for you guys yesterday, eh? Oh, there we go. Where my closed cap? Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay, the captioning is working. That's cool. Nice. All right, that's all I wanted to check out. It's kind of weird. I've got this truss mic here, which is really, really good, but for some reason I'm getting a weird amount of noise. So I got to sort of hunt down the reason for that a little bit later. Okay, so I'll start off this session by, first of all, pointing out something that you might not realize. Well, actually, I kind of gave the game away. I was going to ask you what you guys thought was the most important module on the course. And the obvious answer is this one, Visual Studies, right? Can you guys tell me why I consider, out of all of the animation modules, the introduction to Maya, the 3D production design, all that, why I think Visual Studies is the most important module? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, partially. So why are the fundamentals so incredibly important in Visual Studies? Maybe it's a little bit too early in the morning for this kind of a thing. Let me ask a different question. What is the difference between what we do as artists and fine art? Any thoughts?
Adding motion?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just in terms of animation. I was sort of gunning for an art versus art kind of comparison. But no, that's true. So we basically take our artwork and put it in a timeline. Add motion and emotion and that kind of a thing. But any other thoughts in terms of the difference between commercial art and fine art? I will address that in just a moment. But there is, at the heart of that statement, is this idea of commercial art perhaps being more entertaining and a little bit less stuffy than fine art? Yes. Well, you know, the ethos behind fine art is quite noble and not to be disregarded. And I'll explain why it doesn't necessarily need to be disregarded. It's what fine artists generally tend to pursue is some sort of analysis of the human condition. I'm super overgeneralizing, and I apologize to fine artists out there. And there is validity to the art form. But something I talked about in my morning preamble prior to this class is the fact that I find it sometimes surprising that in the fine art world there's a certain amount of rigidity in terms of how we approach visual interpretation of the world around us. I also caught up on the Discord chat late last night and saw a couple of people commenting about your typical high school art class. Now, here's the thing. In like 30, 40 years, high school art class has not changed at all. There is a certain right way and a certain wrong way to do things. And I'm here to categorically tell you that that's not how we approach art. Right? And I'll tell you why. It's not an attitude. It's not it's not an opinion per se, right? Because an artist is typically governed by left thinking. Not always, because we have a lot of right-thinking artists and things like that. But the reason why there's a tendency for left thinkers to gravitate towards the creative arts is because we are all not stronger. We are more comfortable with lateral thinking. We can make a whole bunch of diverse connections from various different sources. And we talk very, very visually, and we bring in multiple sources of information, sometimes radically different, to just hammer home a singular point. Right? So it's a way of thinking. And again, I'm overgeneralizing. Right? So into this sort of mental landscape, we drop in as an artist and become single-minded and rigid. No, that doesn't work for me. Right? Because typically that mentality needs to experiment and use a variety of different sources. That's something I mentioned in this morning's stream as well, is with a lot of fine artists, even experimentation, there's a proper way to do it and an improper way to do it. And so that's kind of anathema to me in terms of how we approach creativity. Right? In addition to that, there still seems to be a vilification of comics, video games, and cartoons to this day. Right? And you will encounter that. You will continue to encounter that in your careers where that is not considered real art. Right? I do sense that things are changing a little bit. So the Tate Modern had a exhibition featuring comic book art. But it's almost as if before you get into an art gallery, there has to be a certain number of decades that pass by. So a lot of the comic book art was like 1930s, 1950s type stuff, right? Nothing modern, which is surprising for the Tate Modern. Any thoughts about that? How did you feel about, I guess, comprehensive art class? Yeah. That again is an experience that is unfortunate, and I wish you hadn't gone through that. I was lucky enough that when I was in high school, there was this specialized art school. It was called H.B. Beale. A number of us who work in the games industry actually went to this school. And the way they treated commercial art was with the utmost respect. So it was fantastic. It was a really good experience. I have experienced art teachers of the ones that you've probably experienced. Let's just take a step back and talk about my philosophies towards visual studies in this particular module, right? So number one, straight off the bat, I'm here to take your voice and amplify it, not to overwrite it with my own style. That's not what I'm intending to do here. So if you prefer sort of the Edward Gorey, Tim Burton style stuff, that's cool. I'll take you in that direction, and I'll steer you to reference material that can help you achieve that. If you prefer the Disney style stuff, then yep, I'm going to take you in that direction and help kind of mold you and perfect you in that direction. But at no point will I say, no, you got to do it my way, right? Because the whole point of visual studies is not to drown out your voice, but to make it louder, to sharpen it, and to make it more focused, right? So that's kind of the ethos that I'm using to approach this course. So back to why visual studies is the most important module in this course. Well, if you remember from yesterday's lecture, I mentioned Jeff Oken, I think he's the president of the VS, Visual Effects Society, currently, and his statement that there are a lot of artists that are going into the industry that know how to operate software, but very few of them who know how to, quote, see, right? So it's that sort of visual acuity, or that artist's sensibility that needs to be honed in the visual studies course, because everything else after that, when you model, when you sculpt, when you render, when you texture, it all has to do with all the sort of art rules that you learn in this particular module, right? And again, it's very, very easy to lose sight of yourselves as an artist when you're lost in the technology, right? So I will be constantly there to remind you that you are artists first and software operators second. No, actually third, fourth, fifth. I mean, software operator just sounds like you're a technician, and you guys are artists, right? So that's my kind of promise to you in terms of where we're going to take you and why I place a lot of emphasis on visual studies. Any questions or thoughts or comments on that? So what is it that you wished you'd learned in art school?
I wish I'd actually taught some of the fundamentals because my GCSE art class was 2 or 3. They just let us do our own thing for an hour once every few days. That was very teaching real.
Right. I think a lot of times those art sessions dive into the exploration and experimentation sort of stage a little bit too early, right? So I equate it this way, right? So if you get a martial artist, I'll equate everything to martial arts. You'll get to know me over the course of the year. I do tend to equate things to martial arts. But if you take a martial artist and you stick him in the MMA ring, and then they start to do relatively well, they start to realize that the rigid teaching of martial arts isn't applicable to going in the ring, right, with the ground game and being a striker. And then suddenly they start to modify their style, and they start to understand, no, there's a particular way you got to fight when you get into an MMA ring, and just the traditional karate doesn't really work. But what happens is that fighter comes out of the ring and then talks to a bunch of young fighters and says, you don't need to learn karate. Karate's useless. Karate's useless in the octagon. You can't use it, right? So what ends up happening is a lot of young fighters who've never taken karate step into the MMA ring and get slaughtered, right? So what a lot of people tend to forget is that, yes, you can free-form art. Yes, you can go in completely experimental and be left to your own devices. But it helps to have some kind of discipline first as a frame of reference. It's difficult to build your own interpretation of what you see and what you experience in life if you got nothing to back you up, right? So I think that's part and parcel the mistake of those type of exploratory sessions. Is you're right. You need grounding in fundamentals. You need some sort of lecture, tutorial, teaching to at least give you a few tools. Once you have those tools, then you can play with them and build whatever you want. But without those tools, you have nothing. Right? So that's really important. But the other thing that's really important about the approach to fine art is that the emphasis is on emotional content or some sort of emotional trigger that describes the human condition. That is exactly the same as what we do in commercial art, right? So, for me, I used to have a quote where I would describe the difference, right? So for me, as a commercial artist, I'm more interested in finding universal truths, right? I'm more interested in creating a piece of artwork that resonates with as many people as possible. And I think, to a certain degree, fine artists are flipped on that, right? They are more interested in personal exploration. And whoever gets it, gets it. Doesn't matter. As long as they know, or they've gone through the therapy of putting things down on canvas or clay or wood or what have you, right? So for them, it's very much a personal journey, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's completely valid and laudable. I'm just not interested in it. I'm not interested in personal revelations. I'm more interested in saying, hey guys, I've got this cool little sequence. I want you to see it, and I hope you get jazzed from it and you like it. Right? So I think that's at its heart what separates us as commercial artists. We like to get the same kind of emotional intensity, the same kind of statement on the human condition, just communicated out to as many people as possible. And that's the trick. And there are a few visual tricks that we can use at our disposal. Any thoughts or comments on that? No? Okay. So let me flip over. Where have I got? Alright, so that's right. Yeah, that Overwatch trailer is great. That just pretty much sums up my approach to animation and visuals. But we'll come back and we'll analyze that later. All right, so I'm going to take you through a brief journey through art history. But what I do different from every other art teacher in the past is I don't start with the old masters. I start with people who are current, and then we'll work our way backwards, right? I find that that's a lot more interesting that way. I mean, there are more current artists that I'm going to show now, but I just thought I'd start somewhere, right? So this is one of the etchings of an artist that I grew up with, a guy named Bernie Wrightson. I don't know if you guys have heard of Bernie Wrightson. Massively famous. Probably not. You guys are probably too young. Bernie Wrightson is the zombie guy. He made all the horror comics when I was a kid. Right? But if you look at a lot of his traditional ink work, it's amazing. It's like right up there with any kind of fine artist. Right? The way he's captured the lighting and the shadow and the focus and foreground, midground, background and tonal balance and all that kind of stuff. He just likes doing the undead. Right? And his stuff is just phenomenal. Right? Next we have Frank Miller. He's another sort of seminal comic book artist. He had a huge influence on me as a kid. You might recognize this character, Marv, from Sin City. So this was during Frank Miller's experimental phase, where he did all the obviously the very, very harsh black and white sort of, I want to say tonal studies from like the Sin City series, but very, very graphic in the way he approaches his characters and things like that. There is Joseph Madura. Oh, let's see if we can zoom this guy out. There we go. I think this is a Madura. Yeah, this is Joseph Madura. Right? So he's another phenomenal comic book artist. You might recognize him from the Dark Stalkers series, I think it's called. Yeah, let me just do a quick little Google. I'll just do it. His nickname is Joe Mad. Okay, so here's an example of Madura's artwork and his style. Right? Well, actually, I wanted to take this guy and talk a little bit about that character design as well. Right? Any comments on Joe Mad, Bernie Wrightson, and Frank Miller? Any preferences? Nope. Okay, that's cool. We're still at 6. All right. So these are sort of traditional comic book artists. Let's compare them to the old masters, the fine art guys. Let's take a look at Rembrandt. You guys have heard of Rembrandt, right? Actually, there's another Rembrandt painting here. So let's take a look at this. Right? This is a painter that we generally study sort of in a classic art history type setting. Right? Now, once you understand and appreciate let me just see if I can open this image in a new tab. So once you start to appreciate the craftsmanship that Joe Mad used to bring that highlight across the top of the head to create the sheen, the wrinkles underneath the eyes, the shading, the cross-hatching, all that kind of stuff. Well, there's no cross-hatching in this per se. But just the pencil work in terms of how Joe Mad attacked the different areas of light and dark, the midtones and the grays. And then you come and you take a look at Rembrandt's head of an old man with a cap. It's just phenomenal. if we come in here and we take a look at the wrinkles on the forehead that was painted, the eye bags, the use of shading, and sort of bounce light that comes in here and brings out that skin tone and color, it's just phenomenal. The wispiness of the strands of the beard hair on the side there, it's just amazingly accomplished. Same with his self-portrait here. This is his famous self-portrait. So let's take a look at that, and we'll go to Johan Vermeer. So here's another Vermeer painting. Now, for me, Vermeer is one of my favorites because he's one of the old masters that got really, really close to photoreal in a lot of his studies. And I'm sure you can agree that looks pretty phenomenal in terms of a classic painting. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So let's talk about what the Crow Father did right and what the head of an old man with a cap did right. What are the two things that are working? First of all, do you like those two pieces? They're dead boring. Okay, so the reason why I chose this particular reference of Rembrandt is the fact that oh, okay. Cool, no problem. The reason why I chose this one is because I am doing a freelance concept art pack for a television show being pitched at the moment, right? And what I need to do is design an older zombie, right? So in all likelihood, this will be my primary reference in terms of tackling that painting, right? So I guess when it comes to sort of studying, I know. What I'll do is I'll show. Let's take a look at ArtStation. So their splash page is really, really good. So let's find something that's not boring and talk about it. The larger featured one is pretty good. Wow, that's really well done. Do you guys find this less boring than the Rembrandt?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, she's not doing anything. She's just standing there. I mean, there's the easy answer. It's because it's a fantasy setting. Okay, well let's go back. Pick something else, right? Let's see. There's not much that I find that massively interesting on the splash page today. What about this one?
This one's a lot more similar because of the shared color scheme, I guess.
Yes, yeah. I would say this is a little bit more interesting. Why is this a bit more interesting? Or not. You may find this less interesting. Yep. Yeah, see, I'm gunning for an easy answer here, right? And that's exactly it. There's a little bit of a story, right, behind this particular piece. The last one I showed you, let me duplicate this guy so we can pop back over and look at it. Right? So take a look at this. It could be a story behind it. There's some implication in the background that might be a neck. Because of her pose that's quite comfortable with it, and sort of the cybernetic arm, you kind of get the idea that her and the technology behind her, even though we can't tell what it is, are intimately related. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, but basically she's posing for a photograph, right? Whereas this one gives us the feeling of being a voyeur. We're watching this event happen in front of our eyes, right? And that's the power of using narrative inside a piece of concept art, right? But really, I wanted to touch on the fact that the commonality between these two in terms of execution is the masterful use of light and shadow to create a mood, right? So it's kind of interesting to me that you may find this sort of boring, but I wonder as well if it's the context of the fact that I said it was a Rembrandt, right? Now, if I told you, without telling you, identifying the artist, that this is a shot from a mood-boarded sequence of a wizard deciding, an evil wizard deciding on the fate of his younger brother, right? Now, or something of that nature, if that would shape the context of how you interpret it, right? So, I mean, I'm going down this sort of train of thought to help show you guys that there's a lot to interpreting art other than just simply looking at this is a Rembrandt head of an old man with a cap, right? And what I used to do in a lot of traditional art history classes is I would harvest a lot of the ancient artists, and in my head I'd be going, yeah, that guy's a dragon rider. Yeah, this, she's orchestrating some sort of escape from prison and that kind of thing. So I'd sort of take a look, and instead of interpreting what I saw in the classical sense, of which the art history teacher would be explaining to us, I'd just go off on a tangent in my head. And I'd be remembering all of these images to draw upon later for my own artwork, right? And I suspect, well, I don't suspect, I know Bernie Wrightson did the same thing, right? Because when he was in art class, he was bored. All he wanted to do was create monsters, zombies, that kind of stuff. But he absorbed all of the art history lessons, all of the old masters' techniques, because his ethos was, if I'm going to create zombies and monsters, I'm going to create them using visuals that look like an old master's painting. And to a certain degree, I think he achieved that. Right? So let's take a look at a couple of other concept artists. Feng Zhu is a big one. Do you guys know who Feng Zhu is? Okay. So he pretty much, I don't want to say, he was one of the best lecturers for the Naman School of Digital Arts, right? He worked as a concept artist for a number of years in video games, movies, television, right? So a lot of his stuff, what you're looking at, is just a layering of the fundamentals and an understanding of the old masters executed for a sci-fi setting or a fantasy setting or that kind of thing. So this is what I'm trying to get you guys to do, is to understand that when we take a look at art, it doesn't matter where it's from, what the source is, how long ago it was. There are things in it that you can absorb and take with you into your own pieces as you develop them, right? So a lot of these techniques, the light and shadow, the separation of tone, all that kind of stuff, is something that's been going on for years and years and years. Right? Okay, do you guys have any artists that you're fans of? Okay. All right. What I'm going to do is, let's take a little bit of a break. I need to go downstairs, grab my Wacom tablet, and connect it to this PC up here. And then we'll get into some drawing sessions, and I'll talk you through a little bit of my process. So we're at 10:45. So, yeah, 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. We'll meet back here. Yeah, okay. We'll see you in a bit.